There's a certain stillness in Savannah at night that you don't notice until you're out walking. The way the trees hang low and heavy with moss, how the old buildings keep quiet secrets, and the cobblestones catch just enough of the streetlight to make everything glow. It was the kind of evening where you feel lucky just to be alive. Kate and I had just left this art gallery downtown. Not something we usually did, but she was trying to branch out, she said. Try new things. She'd been following this local abstract painter on Instagram and finally convinced me to come to one of his openings. We'd met some of her coworkers, chatted with strangers over cheap wine and overpriced cheese cubes. She was in her element, talking, laughing, gesturing with her wine glass like she was born in that world. She looked beautiful. Red dress, simple gold hoops. Her hair swept back like she'd barely tried. But of course, I knew better. She'd spent at least 45 minutes getting ready, humming to herself in the bathroom while I waited downstairs, scrolling mindlessly. And as we walked through the square on the way to our car, she reached over and slid her hand into mine. Just like that, like nothing in the world was wrong. Her hand was warm and soft, and it fit perfectly with mine, the way it always had. We'd been together 4 years. I knew that hand like my own. Every scar, every callus. I could have picked it out blindfolded. I really liked that couple we met. You remember Jen and Theo? She said, swinging our arms slightly. He was the one with the weird shoes. I think they said they just moved here from Austin. She does something with film. God, that studio she works at sounds insane. She kept talking, just full of life in that moment. And I was listening, until I wasn't, because that's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Just a short vibration, quick enough to ignore, but something about it made me check anyway. Reflex, I guess. I pulled it out while still walking, glanced at the screen. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Check Kate's messages with Travis. I'm sorry, but you need to know. I read it once, then again. I stopped walking just for a second, long enough for Kate to tug my hand a little. Hey, she said, glancing back. You okay? Yeah. I lied. Just a weird text. Spam, probably. I kept walking, phone in my palm now, screen dimmed but still visible if I tilted it just right. That one message was all it said. But it was enough. Because here's the thing. I knew that name. Travis. He worked at her new firm. He was one of the junior partners, younger than most of the others, kind of cocky, from the one time I met him at a happy hour. I remember he called me Jake instead of Jack, and Kate laughed it off like it was nothing. I didn't like him then, and I definitely didn't like the way he looked at her. But I told myself I was being insecure, jealous, stupid. But now the name was lighting up in my brain like a damn alarm. Who was the number from? Why now? What did they know? Beside me, Kate was still talking, animated, swinging her bag a little as she walked, completely unaware that my entire reality had just shifted sideways. I couldn't feel her hand the same anymore. It was like something changed in it, like I was suddenly holding the hand of someone I didn't quite recognize. It was warm, yes, but the warmth felt false, rehearsed, like she was trying to keep a performance going, and I was only just realizing I'd been part of an audience this whole time. I didn't say anything as we got to the car. I unlocked it, held the door for her like I always did. She leaned over to drop her bag on the floor of the passenger seat, the neckline of her dress dipping just enough to show the gold chain I'd given her last Christmas. She caught me looking and smiled. What? She asked, teasing. Nothing, I said, climbing into the driver's seat. Just thinking. About dinner. I lied. Where do you want to go? She rattled off a few options. Some new wine bar she'd heard about. A tapas place we hadn't tried. Her voice was light, easy. Not a trace of guilt. Not even a flicker. And all I could think about was that message. I gripped the wheel a little harder than usual, trying to stop my hands from shaking. Because the worst part wasn't the suspicion, it was how normal she looked. How easy it was for her to hold my hand, to laugh, to smile, to talk about dinner. If that message was true, if there was something with Travis, then this wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a repeated one, and that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Scared. Not of losing her, not even of being hurt, but of how well she'd been able to fake it. The drive home should have been easy. 20 minutes, no traffic, warm air blowing through the cracked window. Her humming along to some indie playlist she'd queued up on Spotify. But my mind was nowhere near the road. It was back on that message, check Kate's messages with Travis. It was screaming in my head like it had been carved into the dashboard in front of me. I couldn't stop glancing sideways at her. She sat there like nothing was wrong, scrolling through her phone, thumb flicking smoothly across the screen. Occasionally she'd smirk or smile at something she was reading. Probably a meme, maybe a text. But in my head, all I could see was her talking to him. Travis. It felt like a splinter buried just beneath the skin of my thoughts. Not enough to scream, but always enough to sting. He'd come up in conversation a handful of times since she joined the firm. Travis said this client's insane. Travis recommended that new sushi spot. Once she mentioned he was going to Cabo with some of the senior partners, and I remember saying, must be nice. In that way you do when you're half jealous, half suspicious, but trying to sound like neither. And now I was sitting next to her, watching the screen of her phone light up her face, thinking, has it been him this whole time? I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to keep my breathing steady. We passed under a bridge and the shadows flicked across the windshield like strobe lights. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, and what I saw rattled me. I looked different, not just tired, not just tense, old, like something inside me had aged 10 years since we left the gallery. My face was pale, jaw locked tight. There was this hollow look in my eyes that reminded me of when my dad got sick and I had to drive home after getting the call. That same weight, that same quiet dread. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or if everything was about to unravel. Hey, Kate said, breaking the silence. You okay? I nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. Long day. She smiled faintly and went back to her phone. The screen flickered as she typed something, paused, then deleted, typed again, deleted again. My stomach sank. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible to ignore. She was texting someone she didn't want to get it just right. I thought about asking, who are you texting? But I didn't, because I already knew the answer I feared, and I wasn't ready to hear her say it out loud. I wasn't ready to watch her lie to my face. Instead, I turned the radio on. Static, then soft music. She adjusted the volume and rested her hand on my knee like she always did. That small gesture, so familiar, so automatic, but now it felt foreign. Like she was trying to tether me, to keep the illusion intact a little longer. We pulled into the driveway a few minutes later. The porch light was still on, casting our shadows long and strange across the front lawn. I sat there in the driver's seat for a beat too long, staring at the cracks in the concrete, trying to will myself back into normalcy. Kate reached for her purse and said, "You coming?" I nodded again. My throat was tight. I followed her up the steps, fumbling for my keys even though I didn't need to. She already had the door unlocked. Inside, everything was exactly the same. The framed print above the mantel. The scent of lavender from one of her damn plugins. Our dog, Scout, asleep on the couch, lifting his head lazily as we walked in before curling back up. But it all felt staged, like walking into a set after the actors had left. "I'm gonna go shower," she said, setting her bag down. "Get this makeup off." "Sure," I mumbled. As she disappeared down the hall, I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at my phone. The message from that unknown number was still there, sitting like a loaded G*N in my inbox. I opened my contacts and searched Travis. Nothing. Of course. She wouldn't save him under his real name. Or maybe she had him on mute. Or in another app altogether. Kate was smart. Organized. If she wanted to hide something, she'd know how to do it. I heard the water turn on in the shower. The familiar pipes clanging in the walls. I pressed my palms to the counter, breathing deep, trying not to lose it. I told myself there was still a chance I was wrong. That maybe it really was nothing. That maybe the text was a prank or some sick mistake. I still wanted to believe that. But the truth was, the moment I read it, something broke. Not because I had proof, but because the seed had been planted, and once it was there, it took root. And even if I was wrong, the damage had already started. She was still in the shower when my phone buzzed again. Same number. If you don't believe me, check your phone records. She won't tell you the truth. No hello. No explanation. Just another push, cold and direct. Whoever this was didn't want to start a conversation. They wanted to rip the Band-Aid off. My pulse jumped. For a second, I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the message like it was radioactive. And then I moved, fast, like muscle memory took over. I opened the browser and logged into our phone account. We shared a plan. One of those small ways couples intertwine their lives without even thinking about it. Cheaper that way. More convenient, right? I typed in the password, hands shaking a little. It took longer than it should have. I kept messing up the damn verification code. But finally, the screen loaded. There it was. The full history. And there he was. Travis. Not saved as a contact, of course, just a number. But once you spot it, you can't unsee it. It was everywhere. Calls almost daily. Sometimes twice, sometimes more. Late night ones. 11:42 p.m. 12:15 a.m. Even a few that started after 1 o'clock in the morning. One lasted 57 minutes. Another almost 2 hours. My chest tightened. I felt dizzy. I didn't even need to scroll anymore. The damage was done. This wasn't just casual work banter. These weren't 10-second calls confirming schedules. This was connection. Int * Macy. A thread running quietly beneath our life. I remembered asking her a few weeks ago why she was smiling at her phone so much lately. She said her friend Bree had started dating again, and the group chat was blowing up. I believed her. I kissed her goodnight that night without a second thought. I was a damn fool. The water stopped. Pipes hissed. A moment later, I heard her footsteps padding down the hallway toward our room. I closed the phone records, locked my phone, steadied my breath. This was the moment everything began to rot. I walked into the living room and sat down, trying to act normal, but the couch felt like it belonged to someone else. The walls felt too close. Even Scout gave me a look like he could sense something was off. She came in a minute later, her hair wrapped in a towel, an old hoodie hanging loosely over her frame. She looked relaxed, unbothered. Her skin glowed from the steam. She smiled at me, and for a second, I saw the version of her I used to trust implicitly. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down next to me and curling her feet under herself. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded different, flatter, just tired. She nodded, reached for the remote, then hesitated. "You sure? You've been quiet since we left the gallery." I shrugged, just processing the night. That guy with the Sears *Kerr suit was a trip. She laughed. It was a soft, genuine sound. It made everything worse. She nestled in closer, laid her head on my shoulder. I didn't pull away, not yet, but my body went stiff. She didn't seem to notice. We sat there for a while with the TV on, though I couldn't tell you what we watched. I kept thinking about those calls. The timestamps. The laughter in her voice when she said she was texting Bree. The way she always left her phone face down. At some point, she yawned and said she was going to bed. Kissed my cheek. "You coming?" "In a bit," I said. She smiled and walked upstairs. As soon as she was gone, I stood up and leaned against the wall, forehead pressed to the cool paint. I felt like I was floating a few inches above my own life, watching it happen to someone else. She was cheating. I didn't have screensh *ts. I didn't have a confession, but I had enough. The frequency of the calls, the timing, the secrecy. My gut knew. My heart knew. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat at the counter. I didn't drink often, but I needed something to dull the edge. I stared at the bottle, fingers wrapped tight around the neck. There's this weird thing that happens when betrayal sets in. Time slows, but your thoughts race. You start reliving conversations, moments, looks, and suddenly everything is suspect. The night she came home late, smelling like unfamiliar cologne. The time she laughed too hard at a text and said it was a meme I wouldn't get. The mysterious charge on our card for an Uber ride in the middle of the afternoon when she said she had lunch with a client nearby. It all clicked. I stayed up for hours just sitting there, drowning in realizations I didn't want. The beer went warm. My phone buzzed once more, just a random spam call. I stared at it like it might bite me. Eventually, I stood, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Our bedroom door was cracked open. I stepped inside quietly. She was already asleep, breathing slow and steady, curled up under the comforter. I looked at her, really looked at her, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't recognize her anymore. The woman in that bed might have looked like my wife. But whatever version of Kate I had fallen in love with, she was slipping through my fingers, already halfway gone. The next morning, everything looked the same. Coffee mug by the sink, her keys on the hook, sunlight pouring through the same damn kitchen window, but none of it felt right. Kate was humming to herself, moving around the kitchen in that lazy, Sunday morning kind of way. She wore one of my old t-shirts, hair up in a messy bun, barefoot, carefree. She looked exactly like the woman I'd built a life with. But all I could see now was the shadow of someone I didn't know how to talk to. "Want eggs?" she asked, turning to me with a pan in her hand. I shook my head. "Not hungry." "You okay?" "Didn't sleep well," I said. Understatement of the century. She gave me a soft, sympathetic look. The kind you give to someone you love. Or maybe the kind you give to someone you used to love, but don't want to hurt just yet. I couldn't tell anymore. I sat down at the table and sipped the coffee she had already poured me. Tasted burnt. Or maybe that was just me. My mind kept flashing back to the call logs, the late-night conversations, the silence from her phone the moment I walked into a room. How she used to show me every funny message she got. Memes, texts, dumb work gossip. And now, nothing. She plated her food and sat down across from me. Phone beside her, face down. Always face down. I watched her eat. She scrolled a little, smiled faintly at something on the screen. That same smile I'd seen the night before. The kind of smile you don't realize you've reserved for someone else. That's when it hit me. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit here sipping coffee, pretending we were fine. I couldn't keep ignoring the storm inside my chest. She picked up her phone again. That was it. I reached across the table and grabbed it. Not violently, not yelling, just fast, decisive. "What the hell, Jack?" she snapped, clutching for it. "I want to see who you've been talking to," I said, voice calm, but barely. "Give it back," she said, rising to her feet. "That's my phone. And this is my marriage," I said, pulling out my own phone from my pocket. I opened the photo I'd taken of the call log from last night. I slid it across the table. "Explain this." She froze. Her face didn't twist into shock or horror, not like I expected. She didn't even look surprised. Just blank, like someone who had rehearsed for this moment and finally got to the scene. "You went through our phone records?" she said coldly. I stared at her. "That's what you're upset about?" "That I checked." She didn't answer. My heart pounded. I stood, stepping closer. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just held the truth between us like a mirror. "You've been talking to Travis every day. Late at night. Lunchtime. When you told me you were with Bree. When you said you had back-to-back meetings." Still, she said nothing. The silence was louder than any scream. "Are you in love with him?" That got her. Her eyes flickered. Her lips parted, then closed. "No," she said finally, but the word had no weight. It just hung in the air, limp and unbelieved. "You don't do this with someone you're just friends with," I said, voice cracking. She sat back down slowly, as if the weight of it all had finally pressed her down. Her hands shook, but her eyes, still dry. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," she said. My stomach turned. "So you admit it?" She looked away. I laughed, bitter and broken. "Unbelievable. I never meant for it to get this far," she said quietly. "It started as talking, venting. He was easy to talk to. I was lonely, Jack. You've been distant. You come home, you're quiet. You're tired. You barely look at me anymore. Oh, so this is my fault now? I said, the laugh leaving my throat like venom. She blinked. I didn't say that. But that's what you meant. No. She stopped herself. I don't know. You don't know, I repeated. Well, I do. I walked over to the counter, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder I had printed last night. I'd highlighted the calls, marked the dates and times. I'd even included a few emails I'd managed to forward from our shared iPad, ones she'd carelessly left open. I dropped it in front of her. I want you out by Friday. Her eyes finally filled, not with rage, not with a plea for forgiveness, but with resignation. You're really ending this? She whispered. You ended it, I said. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She reached for the folder, hands trembling. You don't want to talk about it? Try counseling or... Counseling? I scoffed. You needed counseling when you started texting him after midnight. When you told him you couldn't wait to see him again. When you hid your phone from me every night. Not now. There was nothing else to say. She sat there, eyes glossy but dry, staring down at the folder as if it might morph into something that made this all less real. But it was real. And irreversible. The woman I married was gone. What sat in front of me was someone I didn't know how to reach, and no longer wanted to. When she left for work the next morning, the house finally exhaled. It was like the walls themselves had been holding their breath. Her toothbrush still sat by the sink. Her shoes were still by the door. Her perfume hung in the air like a ghost I couldn't shake. But the silence? That was mine again. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I could actually hear myself think. I stood in the middle of my bedroom just looking around. And I don't know what hit me, but suddenly I couldn't stand to see her stuff anymore. Not because I hated her, not even out of revenge, but because every drawer, every corner, every item she left behind felt like a lie still pretending to be a memory. I opened her side of the closet, folded her sweaters the way I knew she liked them. Sleeves tucked in, not rolled. I didn't throw anything, didn't break down or rage or scream. I just moved like I was evacuating a life that was already burning. Her favorite scarf, the one I gave her last Christmas, still had a faint stain from that hot chocolate spill in Asheville. I stared at it for a moment, then dropped it into the suitcase. The wedding photo on her nightstand? I turned it face down. Some people talk about heartbreak like it's dramatic, loud, explosive. Mine was quiet, methodical, like I was scrubbing out the last traces of a story that didn't end the way it should have. And then my phone buzzed. Same unknown number. I stared at the screen for a while before opening it. You did the right thing. I'm Travis's wife. He cheated on me with your wife. I've known for a while, but now we act. I sank onto the edge of the bed. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. It was more like I just reached the final puzzle piece and everything locked into place. She had a name, Sarah. And suddenly, I wasn't alone in this mess. I texted back. When? She replied almost instantly. Can you meet today? Somewhere neutral. I think we need to talk. We agreed on a time, place, simple, civil, necessary. After that, I went downstairs and grabbed another box. I packed her notebooks, the one with her messy handwriting and grocery lists and half-written poems. I found an old Polaroid of us from New Orleans. She was wearing a floppy hat and laughing mid-blink. I tossed it in the bottom of the suitcase without a second thought. When I was done, I zipped up her life and left the bags by the front door. It wasn't anger. It was survival. It was late afternoon when I pulled into the parking lot behind an old bookstore downtown. The kind of spot where no one asks questions and no one notices your face. She was already there. Gray coat, arms folded, posture stiff but composed. Her eyes met mine the second I stepped out of the car. Jack? She asked, though I think she already knew. Sarah, I said. We shook hands like two people brokering a ceasefire. No awkward small talk. No, how are you holding up? Because we already knew. We sat on the curb, backs against a concrete wall. As the sun started dipping behind the buildings, she spoke first. It started last fall. I saw his texts. The usual stuff, vague names, calls at weird hours. I confronted him. He denied it, of course. But eventually I got into his backup messages. And there she was. She pulled out a folder from her purse. Neat, organized. Pages upon pages of **TS. Dates, times, photos. There was one of Kate. My Kate. Leaning against Travis's car, laughing. A different version of her. One I'd never seen. "I've been collecting everything," Sarah said, her voice calm, measured. "I wanted to be sure. I wanted proof. Not for court. Not even for me. But because I didn't want him to rewrite the story later." I nodded. I understood that part better than I ever wanted to. "You told me to check the phone records," I said. "That was you." She nodded. "I couldn't sit on it anymore. I didn't know you. But I knew what it felt like to be lied to by someone you trust." We sat in silence for a moment. The air was cool, and the world moved on around us. Cars passing, people walking by, lives untouched by ours. "I'm not here for revenge," she said eventually. "I'm not going to throw bricks through their windows or post the receipts online. But I am going to make sure they don't walk away clean." "Same," I said. "We didn't make plans. We didn't scheme. We just sat there, two strangers joined by the same explosion." When we stood up to leave, she handed me a flash drive. "It's all on here," she said. "Emails, messages, even some recordings. In case you want it." I took it. Not for vengeance. For clarity. As I drove home, I thought about how surreal it all was. How just days ago, I'd held Kate's hand under the streetlights and thought we were okay. How I'd looked at her and seen forever. Now, I couldn't even picture what her face looked like when she was telling the truth. When I got home, the bags were still by the door. Her scarf was half hanging out of one. I didn't bother fixing it. I sat on the couch for a long time, the flash drive Sarah had given me in my hand, turning it over like it was some kind of relic. The final evidence. The story in black and white. Part of me didn't want to plug it in. I didn't need to see more. I'd already made my choice. But there's a line between knowing and knowing. I wasn't ready to cross it yet. Not tonight. Kate wouldn't be home for another hour. She'd texted me around 5 o'clock. "Running late. Might pick up Ty." Like we were still normal. Like we were still something worth feeding. I didn't respond. Instead, I went upstairs and pulled out the manila envelope with the divorce papers I'd picked up from my lawyer 2 days ago. Back when I wasn't sure if I'd ever sign them. But after today, after Sarah, after the parking lot, after the folder full of receipts, it felt inevitable. I signed them at the kitchen table, next to a bowl of oranges and a candle she always forgot to blow out. Then I placed the signed papers beside her bags. Everything was ready. She walked in just after 7, her arms full of takeout and her smile too casual. She froze when she saw the bags. Then her eyes shifted to the table. The envelope. The moment hit like a silent bomb. "Jack," she said. "Just my name. Nothing else." She put the food down slowly, like it might explode if she made a sudden move. "I assume this means you're done." I didn't answer right away. I just stood by the window, watching the streetlights blink on one by one. "I met Sarah today," I said finally. "Travis's wife." I heard her breath catch. "She gave me everything," I added. "She's known for months. You two weren't careful." Kate didn't say anything. She just sat down at the table like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Her fingers hovered over the divorce papers, then pulled back like they were hot. "You actually signed them," she said. "Yeah, I did." A long silence. "I thought maybe after everything you'd want to talk. Or scream. Or throw something. I guess I was expecting anything but this." "You thought wrong," I said. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long. I gave you chances to come clean. You chose silence. You chose him." "I didn't choose him," she said, and her voice cracked for the first time. "I chose something else. I don't know. I was lost. You were always working. We barely touched. We never talked. It wasn't about Travis. It was about feeling." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't spin this into some lonely wife cliché. I would have listened if you said you were unhappy. I would have gone to therapy, taken a leave, done anything. But you didn't give me that chance. You just left. You were still in the house, but you left a long time ago. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. You held my hand last week, I said, stepping closer. In public, smiling, laughing, and all the while you had this other world burning in your pocket. How do you do that? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now. Real tears. But it was too late. I didn't feel anything anymore. Not hate, not love, just calm. She looked up. Is this really it? I already packed your things, I said. You should go. She nodded slowly, wiped her eyes, then stood. She walked to the door, picked up the scarf that was hanging out, and folded it gently before zipping the suitcase shut. Do you hate me? She asked, not turning around. I thought about it. Thought about how much easier this would be if I did. No, I said. I just don't know who you are anymore. And then she was gone. Just like that. The door clicked softly behind her, and I was alone in the house we'd built. I sat by the window for a while, listening to the stillness. Then I saw a car parked across the street. A woman leaning against it. Sarah. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I nodded back. Two strangers. Same fire. That night we sent everything. The call logs. The emails. The screensh *TS. Packaged. Dated. Clean. Straight to Travis's firm, his boss, his family. No threats. No drama. Just the truth, delivered to the doorstep of everyone who needed to see it. Not out of vengeance. Out of principle.